Sorry, last video. So few questions. So first, signature of a function. Basically, this tells you what kind of type of function. There are multiple types of function. There is string, int, void, double. You can have an array if you want. So you can do a string array. You want you can do several things in that. Long, short. Any data type could be what could be returned, and this return value actually tells you what value is being returned. Second thing, you can have functions with no parameter list actually. So you can have functions with no. So it is possible to have a function that does a number of things and just like assuming you wanted a function just to print, you know, and it would do a number of things in there and then it would print them when you call the function, and then when you call it, once this is finished, it'll go back to the next line. So two important things. The third thing, there is something which is called a name and there is called a parameter list. You can return so parameter list. So you have a function which has a name and a parameter list. That said, you can also return a return value from a function without any assignment. So you can easily do that. Okay. The next thing is essentially you can have different types of values. You can have a string for a function type. You can have different things. Also, there's another important concept called scoping, where you can define in these brackets integer I equal to 0, and then in these more set of bracket integer I equal to 0. The scope of that I is just between the brackets that you do, and the scope of this I is between. So as the I is initialized but the scopes don't overlap, then it's okay. But if you do int I equal to 0, then you do this and then you do another one here, int I equal to 0. Now the scope of this int I is this guy. The scope of this int is this guy. So that means this guy is overlapping here essentially. And that's where the issue is. So this is not okay. So this is called a scoping problem. Okay, that's next thing. Also, there are a few things that you need to also know. There is something which is called random that gives you values between 0 and 1. Now, assuming I wanted to get value between 45 and 50, so how does that work? 45 plus 5 into random value. So that means 5 can be 0, minimum value, and can be 1. So this value ranges between 0 and 5. So if you do 45 plus 0, you get the first value, and if you do 45 plus 5, you get the second value. So that's how it actually works basically. It tells you random. Also, there is another type of question that you can actually get. So you can get a z minus a, where z is the ASCII, a is the ASCII, and then you multiply that into random, then this value will be multiplied by a number between 0 and 1. So keep that in mind. Random gives you a number between 0 and 1. So this, assuming this value was say 5, you multiply a number between 0 and 1. So it'll give you, between 0 and 1. So it'll give you either 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on what the random value is. Another thing, there is something which is called global and local. So if you define a variable inside a function, this is your function, this is called a local variable. But if you define a function just below the class, which is not part of any function, not part of any function, that's called a global variable. Keep that in mind. Also, another thing to keep in mind what a stub is. Stub basically is a placeholder for a function. So it defines the function. So you can have a stub which says function, or method, signature, signature, or parameter, but nothing inside here. That means you'll fill this later. That's basically a stub. So few things. So this is your class. Okay, then you have your main method, then you have your say function say add or subtract, and that has a parameter add basically a and b. Now you create the function add a b, so you say public static, so you need to return the sum. So int add ab, but you don't fill anything here, so that's a stub. Now if you say int I equal to 0 here inside this bracket, this is a local variable. If you define a variable here, like int I equal to 0, that's a local variable. And if you define something here, that's a global variable. Okay, keep that in mind.